Okay, yeah, in this video we're going to do a little tour of the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So this is kind of the jump point to kind of get to all the portals really for everything, to manage everything for an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 tenant. This view that they give you by default lately, I don't really like that much. I kind of like to switch to this dashboard view, which brings back this left panel instead of having to keep popping it out. And then I like to do show all and then pin a lot of this stuff because it just makes it easier to kind of find stuff. If you might accidentally forget to hit that show all button, especially these admin centers, I think it's a good idea to pin them because it's just easier to get to. So usually the main one that you're mostly, a lot of times it's common to work from is this users and then active users, and it will show you everyone that's currently active. And currently we just have our admin user that we made during the initial setup, and it has a license of that Microsoft 365 Business Premium. So typically this is like where you can kind of do a password reset. You can do different things like check off certain people and do a, if you wanted to, I can't delete this user because it's my only user, but you can do different things like reset password, work with multi-factor authentication, add a user, and then there's other options over these three dots. But you can also drill into a user and it will bring up this little side panel that you can kind of see more details, and there's usually a count. You can change stuff like the name, like for instance I'm probably going to want to change this name field. So I'm just going to make it admin and then take away, just going to make my admin user, and I will do a save. So I'll close that out, and let me bring it back up just to show you more. So yeah, the account section is more of like, you can see sort of the last sign into that user there. You can do a sign out of all their sessions that they currently have open. You can also like manage aliases, so if you wanted to give them a secondary email address on their account. I don't do this that often sometimes, but yeah, it's where you can add a secondary one. Devices is like devices that are associated with them, so when they get Intune enrolled, they'll have devices in here that they'll be associated with their user because that'll be the primary user for the device. And then licensing and apps, this is where you can basically check off, to basically turn off and on products that they have. This view looks a little different than what it usually is. It used to look a little bit different before, that actually kind of looked a lot better before, but now they seem like they kind of made it where they just show you individual apps. But usually, yeah, this is where you'd manage the license for this particular user, like what they'd have. Um, and then mail is just mail specific stuff, so you can do stuff like forward their mail to somebody else. And this is if you wanted to keep a copy, and you could type in an email address you want it to forward to. Yes, you sure want to close. And permissions, so like if you wanted to have this auto add or give another user permissions to their mailbox to read the mail so that they can add it. And when you add somebody as a read and manage permission, it gives them, it automatically adds into the Outlook desktop app. But Outlook on the web, which is like the webmail, you got to manually add it. But we'll kind of go through that later. Email forwarding, and then there's other stuff here like automatic reply you can put on for somebody, but typically they would be doing that themselves inside of Outlook, and then just OneDrive settings. But most of the time, I feel like you're most of the time doing password resets if you need to, or changing somebody's password, or um, taking away licenses from them, or adding them if you're making a new user, giving them a new license. So yeah, that's basically this. Um, Another area is usually the groups area, so active teams and groups. In here, you can make what they call Microsoft 365 groups, which will basically make like an email address that will be like, you could make it say like finance team at mybusiness.com, and it would also make a SharePoint site for that team or for this Office 365 group. And then it would also you can make a Microsoft team with it, which, so you can have a team and then it will make like a shared calendar and Outlook. So these are like the new kind of groups that they made in Microsoft 365 they basically have more, when you make one, they come with an email address, they come with a shared calendar that gets added to everyone's Outlook, and they come with you can optionally add a Microsoft team with that same name, so people are added to that. So it's basically like multiple things that can be done with this group. Well, whereas like a distribution list is just kind of like, you could make one support at mybusiness.com, but it just basically spews the mail out to the members. Like it doesn't really organize it in a way that it's not like a separate area where it stores the mail. It just kind of is like you send to that address and then it sends to those members that are a part of it. The mail-enabled security group is kind of similar to a distribution list, except you can kind of also associate it with stuff if like, you were trying to secure something in maybe SharePoint to like specific group of people, and then you can also send messages to it. And a security group is more for just like I want to take this group and then apply it to something or group some devices together so that I can apply like say like permissions to them or um, do something to them, like you want to send a policy to those certain people, and by default they make an all users one that just does everybody, which comes in handy a lot. But we'll make some security groups later when we do stuff. But yeah, Microsoft 365 groups are kind of the new modern group that I think we're going to be working with, just to because this is typically how people will kind of make, like say like, oh, I want to make a group called like marketing, and then it'll make a shared calendar and Outlook for them. It will make you can make a Microsoft team, and then it can make also a little mailbox for that team as well. All in this one, just by making one single Microsoft 365 group. And we'll go through that a little bit later. But then the next part is probably shared mailboxes, which is kind of good. It's similar to the Microsoft 365 groups. It's you can make like a shared mailbox called say like info at mybusiness.com or whatever your domain is, and you can give people permissions to that shared mailbox so that it automatically shows in their Outlook desktop app on Windows, and then in Outlook on the webmail they need to manually add it. But it's basically like it'll be a separate mailbox that shows, and there's nobody really logs into it. Like nobody will log into that info account, like, but they'll have it added as like a secondary mailbox in their Outlook. So it's just kind of a separate mailbox from there. It's kind of similar to the 365 groups where it makes a separate folder for, but this one is like an entire mailbox. So it's good for those things where you might have like support or info, or you want a separate mailbox, or orders at your domain.com. So it's good to use that. Roles are if you want to give somebody like a specific role, like as to do different things. It's typically only if you're a bigger company you'd use something like this, roles, to like give another user like permission to change users' passwords or like minimum stuff, not giving them like a complete global admin right, which global admin is like the kind of like the King Kong user of the Microsoft 365 tenant. So sometimes you might want to give a user like help desk admin privileges that kind of gives them like abilities to only do resets of passwords and different things that are involved in that. But that's more when you have like multiple users that you want to, or multiple admins that need to work with the single tenant and not have complete control of it. Resources are like if you wanted to make something like a piece of equipment or a conference room that people inside of Outlook can schedule, and it's basically like, so there's never really a conflict if you have like a conference room or a projector that you want to use. It's not, we don't use it that commonly, but people will use it to kind of like make sure that like say like a conference room isn't double scheduled, and when it starts to become where there's too many meetings for a conference room or a piece of equipment, you can make a mailbox for that, or a resource. They call it a resource mailbox, so that you can schedule stuff for it. The billing area, this is where you can kind of buy more licenses or manage your payment methods. Really, you're only in here if you're really managing the payment stuff. Support is if you want to put in a request with Microsoft 365 if you're having an issue and you want to put a support request in with them to basically see what the issue could be. If you're having a problem with the system that you feel like something is wrong on their side, you can put in a request for them. In settings here, this is where we're going to be adding our domain in, our custom domain, so the my-businessname.com that I purchased, but yeah, obviously it would be yours that you're going to be putting in. This is where we would put this in. We're going to go through the process and do it, but right now we just have the default one that Microsoft gives us. They always give us this, it might be a generic name, .on Microsoft.com. So that's what they usually give you by default, but most 90% of people want, their custom domain to be in, so their users all have basically their email address matches their username that they log in with. These other settings, they're not really that commonly used and if they are, it's you only use it once to make a single change. And then health is kind of like you can figure out if there's a current issue out there with, if it's Exchange Online, which is basically like your email. You can see what the health is and if they're having a known problem. Like if you're having a problem getting connecting to your email box, you can kind of figure out, oh, there is a known problem out there. You can kind of check here as an admin. Then we'll move down a little bit, and these portals are so security has to do more with like Microsoft Defender, which is like the antivirus that is on Windows 10 and 11. That's where you'd manage that, and also like anti-spam policies if you wanted to configure something specifically for it, or if you wanted to set up kind of like an alert, you could do stuff there inside this portal. That's where you do most of this stuff, like setting up specific things, and we'll kind of go through that when we get more in depth with that. Doing the different, like for email and troubleshooting maybe to see what happened with certain messages with a message trace. And then yeah, this is for like Windows Defender, like getting that set up for your users on their workstations. Yep, so that's what that portal's for. And then compliance is more like retention if you had something where you were under some sort of regulation where you had to keep stuff for a while. And it can also be used for like making sure there's like policies in place to prevent data leakage. So like somebody's not sending credit card numbers so that it like can basically encrypt the message automatically outbound if it has some a credit card number or a bank number in it, a bank account number. And you can set up like alerting, so if like somebody was sharing a file externally that you didn't want somebody to be sharing, you could, like a user in your company, you can have it alert you to it. So that's kind of what the compliance area is for. You can also do auditing where you can see like who did something to a certain mailbox, like if they deleted a message or if somebody who has a shared mailbox deleted something and you want to see who deleted something out of that shared mailbox, you can use this audit to figure it out. That's what the compliance area is for. Endpoint Manager is a good place we're going to be in a lot. It is where you do a lot of the Intune specific stuff, like managing the devices that are enrolled in Intune. And that's what they call when you get devices in Intune and they're enrolled in Intune. So this is where we're going to do a lot of the device configuration policies to like make it so like, hey, like I want BitLocker to be encrypted on these laptops. And BitLocker is just the encryption that's on the Windows 10 and 11 computers to encrypt the laptop. So in the event that it was stolen, it'll be encrypted and it will keep somebody from being able to read the data on it. And then you can deploy apps. This is where we're going to deploy the Microsoft Office software. Endpoint security. This is where we're going to kind of manage like the Windows firewall, and then also the Microsoft. It's basically like enabling stuff for Windows Defender. We'll manage that a little bit there. And then this is under devices is where you typically will do a lot of these configurations for like configuration profiles, which is like the policies we're going to put through to like make it so that OneDrive automatically takes over the person's desktop documents and pictures so they get synced to the cloud, so they're kind of backed up to there and they're not on the local laptop. And we'll go through this and doing updates and things like that. So that's kind of the Endpoint Manager portal. It's more for the Intune side of it, slash like managing your devices, whether they be Windows, iOS, Android phones. And then the Azure Active Directory is kind of like the portal that you would use to manage. You can use it for managing users more kind of in depth. That's where you'd be doing this. Like some of the portals have some overlap, like the Endpoint Manager portal. You can also get users from there, but it's more the Azure Active Directory portal has more like in-depth and other settings as well. Like some you can get to multiple pages from different areas in the port in these portals, so sometimes you'll it's not necessarily you have to do it in a single portal. And then the Exchange portal has to do with email stuff, and you can do stuff in here specific to if you wanted to set up something custom with like mail flow rules or do something to a mailbox, but typically you're only in here if you need to do something specific to email that's a little bit more advanced. You don't really necessarily, or you need to trace where an email was, which they call it message tracing, which is like figuring out if a message, what happened to it. Was it delivered? Did it get blocked? You can kind of use this to figure out what happened. So it's a good tool to use for that. And then also SharePoint is where we would make like you kind of work with where you can sort of use SharePoint as like an intranet website where you make a website that you might have company information on it about your company or about like events that's upcoming, or sometimes people just use it as a cloud file storage for the entire company. So like this would be where you'd make a site for say like the entire company to store their files, and by default you get like 1.24 terabytes in total across all your sites to store your data. So you could use it as kind of like you can make a SharePoint site that's literally just like a file share for your entire company, and then people will just they can have it sync with their OneDrive client. You can use a policy via Intune to like automatically sync a SharePoint site to somebody's Windows 10 or 11 computer in the OneDrive client so that it just shows up automatically. Um, that's something usually good to do. But yeah, that's how sometimes people will use it. But also, like I was saying with the Microsoft 365 groups, when you make a Microsoft 365 group, it'll make a site, a backend SharePoint site for it. So it kind of you can kind of structure your file sharing where your Microsoft 365 groups kind of have your file shares for everything, and you kind of use Teams to sort of work with your files, which then in turn get saved to these sites that get created. But yeah, some people will just make a site in here like a general like my business site, and that will just store all the files for everybody to go in for the company and go through. So that's SharePoint. We'll go through that in a little more depth. But and then there's the Teams portal, which is for Microsoft Teams. Like if you want to do specific stuff with Teams, and this becomes a little more relevant if you maybe have like if you get the business phone system license, where you can make in outbound and inbound calls with like numbers to like anywhere in the world. But you can also do stuff in here for specific stuff for like if you're having like meetings, like you can lock stuff down a little bit, and we'll go through a little bit of that too. But yeah, there's also the voice part where you can set up the phone system portion of Teams. But with the Microsoft 365 Business Premium by itself, you don't get the full phone system. It's just kind of the meetings and which people are most familiar with Teams, but it also has the phone system component where you can turn it into that Teams will become your phone system for your company. So it's good, and we may go into that later. I just have to see how much I can go into it with it. Um, but yeah, that's kind of a little bit of an overview of the portal. The admin portal, like, and this is typically where you're gonna go is admin.microsoft.com to manage the Office 365 tenant. And usually there's this little waffle all the time in the top left corner where you can hit, and you can see all the apps that are available to you. And this app, the admin one, is the one that takes you to what page we're in right now. So you can look for that if you're like in another app like Outlook or at OneDrive or somewhere else and you need to get back. You can just easily go to the admin cog here, and it will take you over to this admin portal. But yeah, it's you can poke around and get familiar with it, but it's not too bad. A lot of times you're mostly just in this active users area working with users. But yeah, there's these other portals as well. We'll get into them doing some other different things. But yeah, that's basically like my overview of the Microsoft admin portal.